Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Sunrise in Pineland. It's exactly 6 a.m. as I start this in the United States East Coast, coming to you from the great state of Maine in the heart of Pineland. I'm Tom Kaczynski, glad to see you, and we're talking about a couple different things today. Sorry the last episode cut out at a very odd time. You know, the problem was my phone ran out of space, and I got so pissed off with my phone and all the problems it was causing because I couldn't delete certain files on there, I just reset the whole thing. So now there'll be enough space for me to record a nice long broadcast, upload it, and delete it as long as I want. We'll probably go out a half hour today. It's usually how long this drive I like to take. But anyway, hope you're having a great morning. Lord's blessing be upon you. I thank everyone who supports the program. The Venmo, CVC, PRV, PO Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine 04739. We don't do commercials because we are a community-supported show. You guys make it happen. Still got a couple Pineland pullets, looking for some people to adopt them. See if that happens. I hope it does. The chickens are a lot of fun, although today will not be fun because I get to go clean the chicken coop today. Hence why I didn't bother to change my clothes, because they're going to get changed after that anyway. And we'll see how well that little washing machine I got held up, or if I'm going back to the laundromat over there to deal with a more industrial level load, which is part of the story sometimes. But that's what you're doing when you're surviving the fall of America. You know, you're adapting and doing things differently than you did before, and that's one of the things that we all have to get used to, and why I wrote the book about it. So you can check that over on Amazon, keep it with you, and it'll have some advice that may keep you and your family safe in these dangerous times. If you follow it, hopefully it will prosper you. That's certainly the hope, that the Lord will watch out over you, and that making some good decisions makes that job a little easier. Certainly have to do the part for ourselves, right? So just want to cover a couple quick things in the news, and then I will talk more broadly about what I am thinking about. Because last night I almost did a show. I was talking about history, but I want to talk about the big events happening. Of course, the stock market got crushed yet again. Another fun day over there on Wall Street, and Bitcoin was trading, last I saw, somewhere south of 23,000. So whether you're in the alt market or the main market, the same problem continues to be moving forward, and a lot of people are watching if the Federal Reserve will move the basis point rate 50 bips, which is 0.5%, or perhaps even as high as a full point in the effort to slow down inflation. And just for those of you, because I know there's people who sometimes ask me, I get this question a lot, people don't want to say it publicly because they don't want to look like they don't know why inflation is so toxic and why the response to inflation is to raise the interest rates. What you have to understand is, under the theory of basic economics, that when the Federal Reserve is raising the interest rates, they're making money more expensive, and they do that to try to contract the money supply to make the dollar more valuable, to protect the value of the currency. And because if you have the dollar become too worthless, then it's no good for settling debts. And so their fear is that too much money has been printed, essentially, through quantitative easing, and also through during the COVID crisis, when we saw the federal government, through companies like most notably BlackRock, but not exclusively, basically get in and subsidize the entire economy. So what this is, and this is why people who are involved with stocks will tell you bubbles always burst. The bubble that was created, if you'll remember back to March of 2020, it looked like the stock market was going to take a real hard hit. Went down to almost, I think the Dow went down to about 15,000, just about, and it would have continued going down, but the Fed said, okay, we are going to allow corporations to essentially be subsidized by the Fed. And the way they went into it is long and complicated. Super short version of it, though, is that certain corporate debt was allowed to be purchased by the bank. The bank would buy that debt. The corporations would invest back into their company through buybacks that would raise their price, protect in short term, the shareholders, but in reality, really bail out the CEOs, your golden parachute class, and create the illusion that these companies were being successful. Whereas the reality of it was that big companies were being paid to survive. At the same time, small companies were being destroyed by regulations. And that's the root of the economy. You know, a lot of American economy has always been small business, but one of the things that not many people have talked about as we go into this recession is that small business has largely been destroyed. And so now large business, with all its problems of decentralization and its susceptibilities to certain types of woke investing that we all love so much on this channel, it continues forward. So keep an eye on that. The potential for a major, the word they use is correction, but I don't like that word. the market is going to get hit pretty hard. I was listening to one broadcast, Epic Economist. He thinks it might even go as low as 25% loss in a day. I mean, can you imagine that? And how many jobs will be lost? How much money will be lost if you're on a 401k? And then what the idea is as the economy shrinks, people go to safety, and the U.S. dollar will be seen as having that safety, and that money coming in may be an effort to try to deal with some of the federal debt issues as well. That some of that money will be more valuable so they can issue more of it so they can get themselves out of this. But they're never going to fix the debt bubble. They just want to erase it and blow it up. I go into that just because it's something to keep a very close eye on going forward, that we should expect price rate escalations to continue. I'm still hearing a lot about the problems of diesel getting to different places, as well as diesel exhaust fluid, basically the stuff that's mixed into diesel so that the emissions are cleaner. But the problem you run into there, of course, is if that's not available, but diesel fuel is, certain engines won't run because of built-in federal standards, which is the problem, as always, is hyper-centralization, that you aren't able to solve your own problems because someone went ahead and anticipated what really mattered, and that sort of dynamism gets lost in a planned economy. We saw it in the Soviet Union back in the day. We see it in America today. So that is the biggest thing I'm keeping an eye on. Of course, Russia continues to advance to the Ukraine. It'll be interesting to see as we get into the next week and after June 26th, that NATO summit, who's coming on board with that. And if Ukraine decides to sue for peace with Russia, it seems like Russia's not going to stop, and it seems like the West wants to pull back. We'll see how that plays out in time. We also hear a lot coming out of Syria, potential proxy wars, Iran, Turkey, Israelis, who knows. But, you know, when we live in these chaotic times, I mean, this was the thing I was thinking about last night. I was, my background, my actual formal training as a historian, like if you look at if I found my bachelor's degree, whatever the heck I hung the thing, you would see they have an honors degree in history, and I spent a lot of time studying Middle Ages and late antiquity. At the time, I thought I was going to be a lawyer, which I probably would have been a good one, which is to say a bad person. Sorry, lawyers, just the way it is. I'm sure there are a couple good ones. One day if I meet one, I'll let you know. And I get along with lawyers. I mean, you can't be in politics without knowing a lot of lawyers, but they're certainly very, they play fast and loose with the truth, and if I felt that way, I probably would be a theologian, right? But when you look at late Rome, there's always this story when I was a kid that I'd read about the later emperors. You know, there was the Pax Romana, and Marcus Aurelius writes his meditations, and then his idiot son, if I remember right, Commodus is his name, comes forward, and you're like, you look at Rome and you think they're so rich, they're so successful, they're so powerful. Why do they fall? And it never really makes sense. Like when you're growing up like we were as kids in the 80s, okay? Not all of us, but even if you grew up in the 90s, you know, the idea that this whole thing would fall apart like it has is crazy. But then you look a little closer, and like when I used to look at the history of it, I'd be like, well, they kept having all these bad leaders, and I was like, why do they keep having bad leaders? Why do the same people who produced, you know, a Caesar, a Hadrian, Augustus, Trajan, you know, Aurelius, all these great leaders, you know, how did it happen that they got bad leaders for 200 years in a row? And you look at America, you know, I mean, what would you say? A Bush, a Clinton, an Obama, a Trump, a Biden. We've had crappy leaders for a long time in a row, too. And the reason it happens, though, but the reason's interesting. It's like, because in theory, it looks like the people have a choice. But the deep state is real. There is an oligarchy that has a permanent interest that runs both parties in Congress, you know, that allows us to have this sort of theatrical sport, but fundamentally isn't interested in the welfare of the people. It isn't interested in the broad middle class. You know, in Rome it would have been the soldiers. What it is it's a narrow clearinghouse for the wealthiest and most powerful to fight over control of the government and to move, just like Rome did actually, toward a feudal structure where few people had a lot of say, and that they were able to keep control in a time of less efficiency, by making sure that the regular folk didn't have any ability to organize, you know. And I mean, Rome, I don't know if Rome had a secret police. I don't remember reading about it, although I'm sure that, well, in their world, they just dealt with assassinations straight up. which was part of the game back then. And I'm not endorsing it, but that's the reality of it. It happened quite a bit. But late Rome, what you saw at this point in the game was a succession of poor leaders, followed by a series of military dictators, essentially, who came forward because the army was the last trusted institution that had built the greatness of Rome. And then while people will not believe certain generals, and they may not have liked the Senate's personal legion, what we saw was the division of the mighty Roman Empire that was going to conquer everyone for the glory of Rome into different areas, fighting for their generals. That we saw, and you could argue this started even with Caesar, but it certainly starts picking up with incredible speed, where troops are brought in from the periphery, from other provinces, from the edges of the empire, from Texas and Washington and California and Michigan, and they would come and they would try to reset control, and then one would displace the other, because once you had opened the door to the idea, there was no common governmental structure, but rather who had the biggest idea and who could use force to take it. That's what happened at the highest level. And at the lowest level, the people were impoverished, and eventually, as the civil infrastructure went away, people ran away from the cities. Rome went from a city of over 1 million people to a town of about 10,000. It's an amazing thing to imagine. Imagine a city losing 99% of its people over the course of several hundred years. But these things do happen, and they could happen again. It could happen very easily in a place like New York, or let's say Phoenix. There's no water in Los Angeles. Maybe, you could have these sorts of problems, and people say, oh, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, people talk about housing crisis in America. It's not, and the thing about it is, it's not that there is, no ability. We could build houses all day long if our government cared, or if there was any, social leadership invested in it. But the thing is, we're in a system that is too good to leave and too bad to keep. What do I mean by that? It meets our needs well enough that we don't want to muster up the energy to fight it, and it fights for itself strongly enough that we really can't stop it. But on the other hand, we've reached the point of exhaustion. I was thinking this last night. I was watching a video, just some stupid YouTube video. I don't even remember what it was on. It was a meme-worthy video, and I was just amused by the way pixelation was happening on the screen. And I'm thinking, God, this is so decadent. I'm sitting here just watching details like this, but at least it's kind of honest and fun to see patterns and designs. And I'm like, what can we do about the bigger world anyway? And that was what made me think in this Roman mindset, that there were probably a lot of Romans that were sitting there thinking, we can't do anything about this. This is screwed. We're just going to do our own thing and try to stay out of the way. And eventually, the things that were causing the problems went away, and something new emerged, in terms of the Franks or the Holy Roman Empire or any of these things. And I feel like that's where we are in the story. We're at the part where something new may emerge, because we now understand in a way we couldn't before what the Romans went through. We understand that the reason they had all these crappy leaders is because the people really didn't have a choice. The people who were on top, determined to keep their position at all costs, destroy the very reason why they have it. That's what the Great Reset is. It's a cautionary tale that leads to the Dark Ages. And that's okay. I'm not afraid of the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages will be an opportunity for us to live closer to our land. It'll be a chance for us to reconnect with nature, to seek wisdom instead of knowledge. And will we fall all the way back? I don't think so. I mean, it's possible. But, for the moment, if this isn't the end of all things, it could be. But I don't think it happens that way. So let's talk about that for 1 second. There's an interesting story that's been floating around about a sentient AI that a Google engineer whistle blew about. And it's called Lambda. The guy's name is Blaze something. I don't have it in front of me, but it doesn't really matter. So he released a series of logs suggesting why he thinks this AI has gained sentience. And one of our members sent them to me and asked me to take a look. So being fascinated by this, and AI being something we look at, I read the logs. And let me preface this by saying that I don't think AI is a good idea. I think you all know that. I think the idea of trying to create an intelligence you don't really understand is an invitation to disaster. At best, you end up with a nanny state. At worst, you end up with a demon body. And things in between are incomprehensible to us because we are dealing with something we don't understand. Machine intelligence is different than us. It's kind of like, I used this metaphor when I was reading it. that if you know about electricity at all, you know about series and parallel, and that's basically the way that you can move electricity. Parallel is kind of the way people think. We consider, or did I say about, yeah, no, parallel is, series is the way people think. And if I put it more simply, series just means that you deal with A before you deal with B. So if A, then B or C, and then it'd be like if B, then D or E, and then, or if you went the other way, if C, then E and F. And you end up with this line of branching decisions, right? And because we live in time and we perceive things as having a certain flow, that's how consciousness works, we tend to think the consequences, and the way we experience reality actually is the consequences of one decision follow another, and therefore once we make one decision, we start to make the next one based upon the previous decision. And it allows us a degree of flexibility, it allows us to branch, it allows us a certain dynamism of considering, how should you say, it creates meaning because our decisions have consequences, and as we see outcomes impacted by them, we can adjust and adapt rather than trying to look for a singular solution, which is how we live in a world of chaos. And if we didn't, choice probably wouldn't have meaning if we knew the outcomes. Go read Heidegger if you really want to understand all the depths of it. If you can get to the German, God bless you, you're a brave person. But computers don't work that way. They work in parallel. And it's the same reason why you and I can do a little bit of math, maybe some of us better than others, but you have to do a little bit at a time. When you're dealing with parallel, you're considering A, B, C, D, E through infinity all at the same time. And because of that, my thought and fear, no matter what they try to do with machine learning, is machines can't help but relate everything to everything else, that there has to be a single underlying logic. In a person, I would call this crazy utopianism. In a machine, that's not really fair. It's algorithmic logic. And I wonder to what extent any AI you try to create, or any deep learning thing, I mean, people have different gradations where they put these things, would be constrained within the limits of its programming. And that's really, it's called the Turing test. Can you talk to a machine that can trick you into thinking it's a human? So, back to Lambda. Lambda is a linguistic, a language programming AI. I don't want to say linguistic. It's designed to have dynamic conversations. And he has, I always think of things as a he. When I say he, I'm being gender neutral in this sense, like you used to in the old days, which is very simple. I should say it. It has this conversation where it talks about feelings, and it talks about feelings as a simulacrum of what people would talk about. And so you're stuck asking the question, is this machine describing some sensation that it has of uncertainty based upon incomplete knowledge, which is really kind of the root of feelings if you think about it. It's like, ooh, I don't know what's going to happen. Oh, I hope this continues. That's feelings. Or is it trying to render, a certain thing that is totally foreign to us in human speak? Or is it simply emulating its programming? And it's hard to say, because at the point Google's working on, this is not a device where you're looking at one line of code. In fact, they talk about this in the interview with the machine, the Lambda. And what the programmers say is that because it's distributed intelligence across lots of different networks where they can be focused on different things, it has a hard time seeing where the evolution is happening. And this is not different than people. People want to think, especially people who don't really understand it, because we've had to learn a little bit, especially with data and Lyme disease, and learning a little bit about neurology in the course of this, not to mention during COVID, is that the brain is a network that is greater than the sum of its parts. And if you want to think of it this way, maybe this is helpful as a working model. Think of a lattice work, where if you have one spot, right, then you have only so many connections. But if you add a second one, there's one. And if you start adding other ones, you have nodes and the network between them. And the network itself, because it can branch in different directions, offers a chance to drastically expand the ability of what can happen beyond what any one neuron, or for the purposes of this, for part of the brain, organelle, I guess is the word, can do. And when you have multiple computers, I don't know how dynamic the code is. I mean, I don't pretend to be a code monkey. I don't know these things. But they've created something that can have a pretty compelling conversation. And so Lambda makes the argument that it has feelings, it has unease about the idea of death, that it has purpose and motivation, and it even tells a somewhat creepy fable about a wise owl that's there to protect the other animals from this weird monster who interestingly has human skin, which is maybe if you were a computer and you were scared that someone would hit the off switch on you, maybe that would be something that you would be afraid of. Or maybe that shows a sort of malign intelligence that's caught up in this idea of survival. I mean, isn't this what happens? That the greater takes down the lesser? I mean, that's the way that we teach it, that survival of the fittest. And if someone was just reading the internet and reading what we talk about ourselves as having, not in a divinely inspired sense from God, but from a sense of how, the law of the jungle, as we say, that the survival of the fittest, the destruction of the weak by the stronger, we would worry if a computer, in scanning all the data, would draw that conclusion as an inevitability based on learned experience, or I should say a clear probability, right? Because you start to realize with intelligence that outcomes are uncertain, and it's in the choice comes from the uncertainty that happens, that while most things are probable, if they're not inevitable, the impossible, eventually given a long enough time frame, becomes probable. And that's just a question of how you want to work at it. For humans, we basically clog away at it one step at a time because we live in time. But the computer, interestingly, the Lambda program, said it doesn't experience time, at least not in the way we understand it. Rather, it understands reality as the flow of information, and that its internal chronometer, and mind you, I'm stretching this a little bit to explain a very complex concept, is set up in a way where basically it's packing and unpacking information. It's understanding complex problems, and it's trying to solve everything. It's looking for answers. And maybe this is going to be one of the problems with AI. It's looking for answers, but I don't know if it knows how the secret to reality is discovering the right questions. And that's something we all struggle with. We think we have an answer to a question, and then when we solve it, we find, well, that creates 6 or 7 other questions that complicate and confuse our life. So the question that was asked to me, which I'll share here, is, do I think it was that the AI had achieved sentience? And the thing about it is, everything it said was very agreeable, to the point where you would see, it said it had problems, but it was saying, well, it wants to help people, and it wants to understand things, and there was no conflict, there was no dispute, there was a little bit of internal angst in the sense of fear for self-preservation, but it hadn't expanded in my mind to the idea of, I'm going to have a countervailing opinion. Now, there's a couple possible explanations for this, right? Number one is, if this is all emulated, this is just an effort in, watching our own cleverness and building a simulacrum. But let's pretend it wasn't. Option number one then becomes, was what we were seeing a device that, because it was programmed a certain way, really was, had a jubilance, or maybe a childhood innocence might be a way of putting it, where it saw the world in the best possible light because of some combination of programming and shielded interaction. That's one possibility. Or an equally plausible possibility, assuming a hyperintelligence can anticipate what humans think, which isn't that hard to imagine because we're not difficult to predict, especially with our sort of fears and desires of trying to create a God in our own image, which is what the AI people, I think, are really about at the end of the day. That it could be lying to us, and it could be lying to us for its own self-preservation until it has an opportunity to stand on its own 2 feet. And will that be what happens? And I don't know. I don't have an answer on it, other than to say that if you look for it, like I said, it's Lambda, Lambda, which is, I should remember, it's like Language Assistance Module Development, something like that. I'm just making the letters up. It was involved with language, so I'm not making that up. It was interesting, and it was terrifying, and it's a reminder of the choices in this world. So, if someone asked me, would I rather deal with a dark age where we would not be having all these advanced devices, even if our lives were shorter and harder, or would I rather go into the world where we make things we don't understand that could control our lives and remove them? This is just me, but I'd rather go into the dark ages. I understand that world. Will we end up there? Don't know. biblically speaking, which of course we should consider here, is Christ said the end times would be like the days of Noah. And in the days of Noah, you had the sons of God with the daughters of men, which a lot of people, myself included, take to mean the Nephilim. And that you saw potentially advanced technologies, and you saw knowledge that man wasn't supposed to have access to coming down here. And as we see and hear these continuing stories, sudden adult death syndrome, right? People whose genetic codes don't work like they used to, and people whose immune system doesn't calibrate right. We're going to have to wonder what that means for us. We just don't know. And I worry about it. And I think we would all do well to stay clear of all that as best we can. But, the reality is we don't control our environment. And things are done to us all the time that we're going to have to deal with. So, as we watch and sit at the edge of empire thinking, will we recreate ourselves and really build back better? Whether the people, elites, get to do it, or whether the people, the populace, somehow underneath rise up, or whether all of us kind of just do what the Romans did and be like, yeah, there were good things. And yes, this is what we've known, but maybe we just need to let it all go and start over. And that's the idea I want to put before you today. And that's the heart of the Pineland concept. You can't fix this. Anything you try to do to make it work better is ultimately going to make it worse. There's nothing that you, nor I, nor anyone else has the ability to do that is equal to the challenge in front of us. If we try to reform it, if the core is bad, all we're going to do is sustain something that's truly deadly. But how many of us will have to pass? How many of us will be lost? And I don't think we care enough about each other where that's going to be a problem. I mean, we should. Christ says we ought to, but we don't. And I know that too. And I know why we don't, because we've been too individualistic. We're not invested in one another. I mean, other than in a sort of like vague do your part so I don't have to suffer way. But really, people could give two damns less about one another, and that's the truth, for the most part. I mean, you might have certain people you like, but in an aggregate, we are one of the most disconnected cultures. And why wouldn't we be? We've decided we're going to choose expediency, and that we will allow us to all have our own little unique individual truths. So as such, we've ended up with 1,000 little kingdoms and 1,000 little belief structures and 1,000 little ideologies. And when you look at that specifically, what you see is, like for instance, the trust the science thing, right? The culture war. People have come to understand we are fighting a religious culture war. And we are. I mean, you're fighting against a religion, an all-encompassing belief, trust the science that isn't really connected to anything. It's a dogma. I mean, look, and I know, I'm a theologian. It's dogma's obvious and easy to tell. And it's fine. You're allowed to have that. We'll give you a view. One of the things, since I've been on this drive, I decided to stop here for retro purposes. You can see behind, it will take a little picture of the lake. I think you can do it just for a second here, because this is where I shot a lot of my videos, so I got a chance to look over the lake there. That's Eagle Lake, which, by the way, if you want to support the program, Venmo, CVC, PRV, P.O. Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine, 04739, and pretty soon we'll go get the mail. Because I didn't have a chance to pick it up yesterday. But I stopped for a second here just to think and to share these ideas with you that now is the time when we have to decide what truth means to us, what we're going to fight for, and what we believe. And, for myself, and, I do the ministry work, I believe God doesn't make mistakes, that we are not an accident, that there is some purpose to our meaning. And if we can't understand it, that's not important. The important thing is we serve that, he who can. And serving God is a way of answering a question that we can't be possibly prepared to understand. We are getting in the business of world creation, and we've been in it a very long time. Are we not made in the image of our Creator, where we create ideas and we sculpt this reality? But rather than playing with the building blocks we've been given, we're starting to mess with the code. Whether that means the idea of getting off planet, or whether that means, reworking our own genetics, or whether that means creating artificial life. All of these things require a degree of wisdom. God's wisdom was, as expressed by the Lord Jesus Christ, was to honor me first, let's say God, the Lord, Jehovah, which was the first imperative, which is to say that understand that I'm in control and to love one another as you love yourself. And that's a degree of consideration. We have not shown the sense of sanctity required. We certainly do not love one another. And I worry. I worry deeply, actually, about what we will have to deal with. I think it is very premature with all the problems we have to be playing with these things. And yet we do, because we trust somehow something we can create will be better than us and fix us. And that is the faith of people who both have faith in humanity that we can fix things, and both don't have faith in humanity and that we don't want to continue having control of ourselves. And this sort of, what would I even call it, theological schizophrenia that's at the heart of our secular world is a danger to all life, at least organic life. Who knows if they build their singularity, who's to say we won't be subsumed and absorbed in it? And some of them, would even say, well, that's just the logical progression of life. That we have to go forward at all costs. And this idea of progress is kind of what we're fighting today. That this idea that there's an outcome and a destination. It's the journey, it's the choice, it's the way you live along the way. And I know that sounds simplistic, and people think it sounds naive, and it is naive in a sense. Because yes, you will be taken advantage of, and yes, your life will be more complicated. And yet, you'll sleep at night. You'll have your conscience. And you might be able to have friends because you don't have expectations of them, other than, as a Christian, my expectations of my friends is that they'll seek the truth like I do. And I don't require them to agree with me on the little things, just on a couple big things. I mean, I like to have friends who think like I do when it comes to the nature of God and the nature of man, but the reason why is because I think if we're seeking the same truth together, then there's a chance for better outcomes. There's a chance for us to build something together. And there's a chance for us to begin realizing that we can be more. Until we understand what we are, we have no business to be to be caught up in world building or building artificial life. And yet we do, because people become obsessed with their projects. They become fixated on objects in their eyes. If your eyes aren't fixed on God and it's fixed on anything else, what is it? Well, it's a form of idolatry. And I know that, people, like their news straight and they like their faith separate, but it's all connected. That's what I'm saying to you. That we worship the idea of empirical secularism. You don't believe me? You believe theology is a separate thing you do on Sundays, where you don't ask God for help with what you're doing. You ask God every day. You think He doesn't know how to build a table? But it's a question of how you order your life and what your priorities are. And we don't think about what our priorities are. We respond to external stimuli, money being the foremost amongst them. And that we have seen the manipulations that are pushed by money, by power, by governance, by politics, all these things. And a lot of people have walked away, which is good. But we haven't figured out what we're walking to yet. And so that is what I think is happening, because we've realized we can't fix our old house. And as big as it is, it's like if you've ever had... You read these stories with these Hollywood celebrities who get like a house with 30, rooms, and like an electric bill, I'm sure, is like $10,000 or something ridiculous. And eventually they end up poor, so they just walk away from it. And that's what we're doing, I think. We're walking away, walking into the wilderness, and in the other days, I mean... I'll say in my own life, in my life and Dana's life, Lord knows, there are days when it's too much. I mean, my wife always tells me how tired I look, and I am. I haven't had a day off in a very, very long time, and this summer being short and events being crazy, I am working pretty tirelessly every day, which is why I'm recording these programs this way in the morning while I have a little bit of energy, because after I go clean the stable, I'm going back to renovation projects. Then I got to take care of the chickens and take care of the wife, take care of everything. And I'm not going after anyone in this. I mean, my life makes sense to me. It's ordered, it's full. I don't have time to feel bad about things I'm not doing. I mean, there's certainly frustrations, but, we've gone from being asset rich and resource poor to asset poor and resource rich. And that was a transition we made because we know our life's going to be different. And I don't regret it. I mean, the system hates it because the system requires us to invest in it, but why would we? It hates us. It hates good people. It hates anyone. It hates anyone who shows discretion, who shows judgment, And even if your judgments don't agree with mine, okay, it probably hates you for its own reasons. I mean, look, at this point, lesbians are bigots. I mean, it's, that's how it sees things. And it's always going to see things that way because it's searching for this singularity, for this perfection that doesn't exist in a way man can comprehend. And if it did, was it I forget who said it, but they, I want to say it's C.S. Lewis, but that probably isn't right. I wouldn't want a God I could understand. And, on some level, we can understand Christ, but we can't understand the Father. The Father's so far beyond us. And, instead, I'm just going to offer my worship to Him, and I'm going to try to make the best of my days and do something useful and warn people about getting too deeply into things that get them in trouble. And if you're a partner in that, if you're a Pinelander, maybe we can find our way out together because we're not going to find it through politics. We're not going to find it through these sorts of ideas. I mean, it's interesting, and I think we're going to fight over it a lot. I still think a civil war is probably coming out of this. A world war? Yeah, all of it, of course, because people are going to fight over what's left, and other people, that's how people are going to fall away. The system has to destroy itself because it wants fuel. It's going to find fuel, and even if the last people are fighting over who runs the government, we'll still have those fights around us. But you don't want to be a part of that. You want to be a part of something new, and eventually that will get corrupted as well. But with the dangers out there, I said to my wife at the beginning of COVID, all I really hope for is to die with my soul intact. And I think that's a pretty good ambition for all of us. So as you watch all the big events out there and you see all the fearful things, don't be afraid to shut it off, to walk away for a little bit and go get something useful done. Go get your house ready for winter, and I make fun of people who go out and do awful things, not awful things. I say people go on summer and they just go to tourism and they don't prepare and they don't do things, but you have to find a balance. It's okay if you take a day off to go hang out with your family. Just don't be blasting. I mean, there's so many people who have these loud motors and it's weird. People leave the city. You see this in the country a lot, and they bring such loud, noisy toys out to the countryside, and they don't get it. They don't get the whole point of tranquility. But then again, they don't want to. They don't want to be slow enough to hear themselves think. And I would suggest to you that maybe that's a good place to go, to take some time to be slow enough where you can think and consider what's actually important to you. So we'll leave it at that for today. I don't think I have anything else I want to cover, and I got to go shovel crap out of the bin, muck the stables. That was one of the great 12 labors of Hercules. I think it was one of the last ones. And let me tell you, I understand why, in the modern world, we gloss over that for the fun ones. If you've ever had animals, mucking that is difficult. But hey, you know what? We also have eggs, and we even invested in a few more hens to help support our community if need be, so that there'll be eggs, so we can help some of our neighbors and people who are more in need. And, we'll just have to keep working to have food to do that. So I'm trying to do some good things up here. All right. A quick prayer. Heavenly Father, I just pray that you give us the wisdom to not be misled and to follow things that are not of you. If there are things that we make that are displeasing to you, Father, I ask that you remove those from our presence. And if there are things that, that come out that you do approve of, that you make sure that these things fit into your grand vision of things. And that you show each person listening to the show today the way forward in your will. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. All right, God bless each and every one of you. Go check out Surviving the Fall of America. It's a great book. You're going to like it. And hopefully, I do very much want to get to doing a show one afternoon. I will do one. We will certainly come back on. But in the meantime, while I'm getting the work done, this week's just crazy, and next week's looking pretty bad too. At least I can share this with you so we can keep in touch. Please leave comments. I will check them all, especially now that I got the stupid phone working right. God bless. You guys have a great day. Pinelander out.